She prayed beside the sleeping cowboy, not knowing he heard every word. The prayer was not meant for his ears. Miriam Vale thought the injured cowboy was asleep when she bowed her head beside his bed, folded her trembling hands, and whispered the secret she had carried across 30 miles of dust and shame. But Jonah Mercer heard every word. And by morning, nothing on Red Lantern Ranch would ever be the same. Before that night, Miriam had been only a stranger at his gate, a tired woman with torn shoes, sunburned cheeks, and a carpetbag so empty it looked as if even hope had fallen out somewhere along the road. She reached the ranch at noon, when the Colorado sun was high and cruel, and the whole valley seemed to shake under the heat. Red Lantern Ranch sat below the mountains, surrounded by dry grass, leaning fence posts and cottonwood trees that barely moved in the still air. The main house was broad and weathered, with a porch that had once been painted white. A brass lantern hung beside the door, dull with dust. Behind the house, horses shifted in the shade of a long barn, their tails swatting flies. Farther out, cattle stood near a thin creek, searching for water that had almost disappeared. Miriam stopped at the iron gate and gripped the bars. For one moment, she did not knock. Her hands hurt. Blisters had split across her palms from carrying the bag too long. Her lips were dry. Her stomach had been empty since the morning before. But pain was simple. Pain told the truth. People were harder. She had learned that in Ash Hollow. A town could smile at you for years, then turn its face away in a single morning. A family could praise your honest work, then call you a thief when their son needed a lie to hide his own sin. A boarding house keeper could say, "I am sorry, Miriam," while setting your bag outside like you were a sickness at the door. She had not cried then. She would not cry now. She raised her hand and knocked on the iron gate. The sound carried across the yard, sharp and lonely. A ranch hand near the barn looked up first. He was a lean older man with a gray beard and a tired hat pulled low over his eyes. He studied her a long moment, then came toward the gate with slow steps. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. "No," Miriam said, though the word felt heavier than it should have. "I came looking for work." His eyes moved over her dress, her torn shoes, the dust on her hem, the way she stood too straight because if she bent even a little, she might not rise again. "Work," he repeated. "Yes, sir. Cooking, cleaning, mending, laundry, kitchen work, garden work. I can read accounts. I can tend sick animals if the sickness is plain enough. I can do most things a house needs done." The old man scratched his jaw. "You got a name?" "Miriam Vale." He looked back at the house. "Mr. Mercer ain't hiring." "Then I'll ask him myself." Something in her voice made the old man look at her again, not sharply, carefully. "You walked here?" "From Ash Hollow." His face changed at that. Ash Hollow was near 30 miles by road, longer if a person had no horse, no wagon, and no one willing to offer a ride. "You wait here," he said. Miriam nodded. He left her at the gate. She stood in the heat while the sun pressed down on her shoulders. A horse whinnied from the barn. Somewhere in the dry grass, insects buzzed with a steady, mad sound. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag until the torn leather bit into her palm. After some minutes, the front door opened. The man who stepped onto the porch was not old, though something about him felt worn down. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair touched by the sun and a face built more for silence than welcome. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and a brown hat in one hand. Even from the gate, Miriam could see the stillness in him. Not peace, something colder. A man who had lost something and kept living out of habit. He crossed the yard without hurry. The old ranch hand followed several steps behind him. The stranger stopped on the other side of the gate. "I am Jonah Mercer," he said. "Miriam Vale. You came from Ash Hollow." Yes, sir. On foot. Yes. Why? There it was, the question she had feared and expected. Not cruel, not kind either, just direct. Miriam swallowed. Her throat felt like sand. I need work. That ain't an answer. No, she said softly, it is not. His eyes stayed on her face. The silence stretched. She could hear the wind touch the dry grass along the road. She could feel the weight of every lie told about her still clinging to her dress like dust. Then she said, a family in Ash Hollow will tell you I stole from them. I did not. They will tell you I was dismissed for dishonesty. I was not. They will tell you I am trouble. Jonah's expression did not change. And are you? He asked. Miriam held his gaze, though her legs were beginning to tremble. I am tired, she said. I am hungry, I am afraid, but I am not trouble unless a person counts truth as trouble. Behind Jonah, the old ranch hand shifted his weight. Jonah noticed it but did not turn. Why would they lie? He asked. Miriam looked down for the first time, not in shame, in memory. Because their son reached for something that was not his, she said. And when I refused him, his mother needed me guilty before anyone could ask why I had been sent away. The words left her mouth, and the yard seemed to grow quieter. Jonah Mercer looked at her for a long moment. A hard man might have asked for proof. A careless man might have turned away. A weak man might have said he was sorry and still closed the gate. Jonah did none of those things. He opened the gate. Miriam stared at him. You can work in the kitchen, he said. For now, food and a room, wages after I see what you can do. The old ranch hand raised his brows but said nothing. Miriam did not move. You do not know me, she said. No, Jonah answered, but I know the look of a woman who has been running from a lie. I have seen that look before. Something passed over his face when he said it, a shadow, quick and buried. Then he stepped aside. Miriam walked through the gate. The moment her feet touched the ranch yard, she felt no victory, only the fragile terror of being given a place to stand and not knowing how long she would be allowed to keep it. The old ranch hand introduced himself as Silas Pike and showed her the kitchen, the pantry, the small room behind the washroom where she could sleep, and the cookhouse where the ranch hands took their meals. The place was orderly enough, but it had the lifeless feeling of a house kept running by duty instead of care. The curtains were clean but faded. The stove was cold. A cracked blue cup sat alone on a shelf. In the kitchen window, a dead basil plant leaned in its pot like it had given up months ago. Mrs. Mercer used to keep herbs there, Silas said before he seemed to think better of it. Miriam turned to him. Mrs. Mercer. Silas looked toward the hallway, then lowered his voice. Mr. Mercer's wife, Ruth, died 3 years back. Fever took her before the doctor could make it through the storm. Miriam's eyes moved back to the dead basil. The house made sense now. So the kitchen has been quiet since then, she said. Silas gave a sad half-smile. Ma'am, this whole ranch has been quiet since then. By supper, Miriam had found flour, beans, salt pork, dried apples, and enough coffee to wake the dead. She made bean stew with pepper and onion, cornbread in an iron pan, and apple cakes fried light in a little butter. Her hands burned from the work, but she did not slow down. When the men came in, their talking faded as soon as they smelled the food. A young hand named Wesley took one bite and looked at his bowl like it had spoken to him. Lord above, he whispered, I forgot food could taste like this. A few men laughed, even Silas smiled. Jonah sat at the head of the table. He ate quietly. He did not praise her. He did not stare at her. But when he finished, he looked down at the empty bowl for a moment longer than necessary. Miriam saw it. For the first time in many days, warmth touched the edge of her fear. That night, after the dishes were washed and the ranch had fallen still, Miriam stepped into her small room and closed the door. The bed was narrow. The blankets smelled of cedar. A lantern flickered on the crate beside it. She opened her carpet bag and took out the only thing she had not lost: a small silver cross on a broken chain. Her mother's. Miriam held it in her palm and sat on the edge of the bed. Her feet throbbed. Her hands ached. Her heart felt older than her years. Across the yard, a horse shifted in the dark. The wind moved the porch lantern, and its light swung gently across the window. Miriam bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "I do not ask for much. Just one honest roof. Just one place where a lie cannot follow me." Her voice broke, but only for a breath. "And if this man is kind, help me not fear his kindness." She closed her fingers around the cross. Outside her door, in the hallway she thought was empty, one floorboard gave the softest creak. Miriam lifted her head. "Hello," she called. No answer came. Only the wind. Only the lantern. Only the first small secret of Red Lantern Ranch beginning to wake in the dark. By morning, Miriam told herself the floorboard had been nothing. Old houses spoke at night. Wood settled. Wind pushed through cracks. Mice moved inside walls. A tired mind could turn any sound into a warning. She had lived too long expecting danger to come softly. Still, when she stepped into the kitchen before dawn and found Jonah Mercer already sitting at the table, she nearly dropped the flour sack. He was in the shadows near the window, one hand around a coffee cup, his hat resting beside him. The first gray light of morning touched his face but did not soften it much. He looked as if he had been awake for hours. "You rise early," he said. "So do you." "I own cattle. I cook for men who own stomachs." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched one side of his mouth. It was gone so fast she might have imagined it. Miriam set the flour on the counter and turned toward the stove. She could feel his eyes on her back, not in the way men had looked at her in Ash Hollow, not hungry or measuring, but searching, as if some question had followed him into the kitchen and refused to leave. She struck a match and lit the stove. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Well enough. That room gets cold before dawn. Silas should have put another quilt in there." "It was fine." A pause. "I heard you speak last night." Her hand went still over the kindling. There it was. The quiet kitchen seemed to grow smaller around her. She did not turn right away. She kept her face toward the stove until she was certain it would show nothing she did not want seen. "I thought I was alone," she said. "I know." The honesty of that answer made it worse somehow. He did not pretend. He did not soften it. He simply placed the truth on the table like a plain cup. Miriam turned then. Jonah's face was steady, but his eyes had changed from yesterday. They were not colder. They were not warmer either. They were more awake. "I did not mean to listen," he said. "I was in the hall. I heard my name without hearing my name." "I did not say your name." "No, but I knew." She looked at him carefully. "Then I suppose you heard more than I meant any man to hear." "I heard a woman ask for one honest roof." Miriam swallowed. "I am sorry," she said. "That was not meant to burden you." "It did not burden me." "Prayers have weight, Mr. Mercer." "So do lies," he said. The words settled between them. Miriam looked away first. She busied herself with breakfast because work was safer than feeling watched by a man who seemed to hear more than words. She mixed biscuit dough, sliced salt pork, set coffee to boil, and cracked eggs into a blue bowl with a chip along the rim. Jonah did not leave. He sat at the table and said nothing while she worked. That silence was not empty. It followed her from stove to counter, from pantry to table. She felt herself grow aware of small things, the dust on his boots, the scar across his knuckle, the way his right hand tightened whenever the hall clock ticked too loudly. After some time he stood. "You do not owe this house fear," he said. Miriam looked up. He had his hat in his hand now. "I cannot promise what trouble may ride up that road," he continued. "A man would be a fool to promise what he cannot command, but inside this gate you will be treated fairly. You work honest, you stay. No one here will trade in gossip against you." She wanted to believe him, so badly it frightened her. "Men say fair things in the morning," she said softly. "By supper they sometimes forget." Jonah nodded once, as if the answer did not offend him. "Then watch what I do by supper." He put on his hat and walked out. Miriam stood with flour on her hands, and her heart beating too hard for such a quiet conversation. The ranch woke fully after that. Boots crossed the yard. Horses blew in the cool morning air. Men entered the cookhouse with sleepy eyes, rough voices, and the hunger of people who had already worked an hour before breakfast. Miriam served biscuits, eggs, fried salt pork, and coffee strong enough to put color back into a dead man. The hands were more talkative than the night before. The young one, Wesley, asked if she knew how to make peach cobbler. A thick-armed man named Boone Carter claimed no cook in the territory could make gravy better than his mother, then took 3 helpings and would not meet anyone's eye when Silas laughed at him. Jonah ate quietly again, but this time he looked up once. "The biscuits are good," he said. The table went still for half a breath. Then Wesley coughed into his cup, Boone looked down, and Silas pretended to study the wall. Miriam understood at once that Jonah Mercer was not a man who praised often. "Thank you," she said. His eyes met hers briefly. By mid-morning she had learned the rhythm of Red Lantern Ranch. Silas Pike managed the house and stores, though his knees pained him and he hit it badly. Boone Carter led the older hands and carried suspicion in his shoulders like a rifle he never set down. Wesley was 18, eager, clumsy, and kind. There were 9 hands in all, plus Jonah, and each seemed to move around the ranch as if keeping a certain distance from the main house. Not from work. From grief. Miriam saw it in the little things. No one used the rocker near the porch steps, though it was the only chair in the shade. No one touched the wooden flower box beneath the kitchen window, though it still held dry soil. No one opened the door to the small sitting room off the hall. The house had rooms people avoided. By noon, Miriam was in the back garden with her sleeves rolled, staring at what had once been a proud patch of earth. Tomato stakes leaned like tired bones. Dead vines twisted around the fence. A row of herbs had dried into gray stems. Near the stone border, a small wooden marker lay face down in the dirt. She picked it up. The carved letters were faded, but she could still read them. Ruth's Mint. Miriam held the marker gently. She planted that the spring before she died. The voice behind her made her turn. Silas stood near the garden gate with a bucket in one hand. "I was not going to disturb it," Miriam said. He looked at the dead plants. "Ma'am, it has already been disturbed, mostly by neglect." She glanced toward the house. "Would Mr. Mercer mind if I cleaned it?" Silas followed her gaze. "He might. Then I should ask. He might say no. Then I will leave it." Silas studied her. Most folks would just go ahead and call it kindness. Kindness without permission can still feel like theft. The old man's face shifted. Something in that answer reached him. He set the bucket down. "Mrs. Mercer used to spend more time in this garden than in the parlor, said flowers were fine, but herbs were useful friends." His voice softened without permission. She had a laugh you could hear from the barn. Miriam looked down at the marker again. What was she like? Silas took his hat off and wiped sweat from his brow. Bright, he said. Not pretty in the quiet way, pretty like a lamp in a dark room. Could scold a man and make him feel grateful for it. Knew every horse by name. Made Mr. Mercer less hard. Miriam turned the marker over in her hands. And after she passed, Silas looked toward the mountains. He built more fence, bought more cattle, worked later, spoke less. Some men drink when they lose a wife. Some gamble, some go looking for trouble. His eyes went back to the house. Mr. Mercer turned himself into work and buried the rest. Miriam understood that. Not because she had lost a husband. She had never been married. But she knew something about surviving by becoming useful enough that no one asked what hurt. She set Ruth's mint marker carefully on the stone wall. That afternoon, Jonah returned from the west pasture with dust across his shirt and a dark line of sweat beneath his hat. Miriam was carrying a basket of laundry across the yard when he stopped near the pump. Silas said you asked about the garden, he said. I did. You want to clean it. If you allow it. His eyes moved past her to the dead beds behind the house. For a moment, his face went very still. Miriam waited. The wind pushed loose hair against her cheek. She did not brush it away. She had the strange sense that any movement might break something. That garden belonged to Ruth, he said. Yes. She chose every plant. I know. You would be pulling up what she planted. No, Miriam said gently. I would be pulling up what the drought and 3 years of loneliness left behind. His gaze returned to her. It was a bold thing to say. She knew that after it left her mouth, but she did not take it back. Jonah said nothing for so long that Wesley slowed near the barn to watch, then hurried on when Boone grunted at him. At last, Jonah looked down at the dirt on his boots. She would have hated seeing it dead, he said. Miriam's fingers tightened around the laundry basket. Then I will bring it back slowly, she said, not all at once. He nodded once. Not the mint, he said. I will save the mint if there is any root left. Something moved in his jaw. Then he turned and went to the barn. Miriam stood there with the basket in her hands and felt the size of what he had allowed. Not a garden. A door. She began at dawn the next morning. She did not make a show of it. She did not sing. She did not call attention to herself. She knelt beside the herb bed while the sky was still pale and cool, and she worked with her hands in the dry soil. She pulled weeds from around the dead mint. She found one green thread near the root, small as a whisper, but alive. Miriam smiled before she could stop herself. By breakfast, dirt marked her sleeves and dust clung to her hem. Boone noticed first. "You've been digging graves out there?" he asked. The table went quiet in that way men grew quiet when a joke might not be a joke. Miriam set down the coffee pot. "No," she said, trying to keep one from being dug. Wesley looked at her, then down at his plate to hide a grin. Boone did not smile. "You think coming here and planting a few herbs makes you part of this place." Miriam felt the room tighten. Silas stopped cutting his biscuit. Jonah's fork paused, but he did not speak. "Not yet." Miriam looked at Boone Carter. He had suspicious eyes and grief hidden under roughness. She had seen men like him before, men who thought distrust was loyalty. "No," she said. "I think cooking meals, washing linens, cleaning rooms, tending a garden, and doing the work I was hired to do makes me useful. Being part of a place takes longer." Boone stared at her. Then Silas gave a dry cough that might have been laughter. Jonah set his fork down. "That answer satisfy you, Boone?" Boone looked at him, then back at Miriam. "For now," he muttered. "Good," Jonah said, "because I do not pay men to trouble the cook before sunrise." The meal continued, but something had changed. Not much, enough. Later, when Miriam was washing dishes, Wesley appeared with an empty bucket. "I can haul water for the garden," he said. She looked at him. "Did Mr. Mercer send you?" "No, ma'am." "Did Silas?" "No, ma'am." "Then why offer?" Wesley shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "My mother used to say if something green is trying that hard to live, a decent person ought to help it." Miriam's throat tightened. "Your mother sounds wise." She was. He picked up the bucket and hurried out before the sadness could settle. Miriam watched him go. That evening, she carried scraps to the chickens and found Jonah standing near the garden fence. The sun had dropped behind the mountains, leaving the sky pink and gold. He was looking at the herb bed. "There is still mint," she said. "I saw. It may not survive." "But it might." "Yes," she said, "it might." He rested one hand on the fence rail. The porch lantern behind him had been lit, and its glow moved faintly in the evening wind. "I heard you answer Boone this morning," he said. "I should not have spoken so sharply." He needed sharp. She looked at him. "Do you always let men test new people that way?" "No." "Then why today?" His eyes stayed on the garden. "Because I needed to see if you would fold." The honesty struck her harder than insult would have. "And did I?" she asked. He turned toward her. "No." She did not know whether that pleased her or wounded her. "Maybe both." Jonah seemed to read something in her face, because his voice changed. "This ranch is not gentle with strangers," he said. "That is not always right, but it is true. I have not known many gentle places, Mr. Mercer. I am beginning to understand that." The words were quiet. Behind them, a horse shifted in the barn. Somewhere in the house, Silas closed a door. The last light faded from the mountains. Miriam looked at the small green thread of mint in the dark soil. "One honest roof," she whispered, almost without sound. Jonah's head turned. She realized too late that he had heard. Again. Her cheeks warmed, but she did not apologize this time. Jonah looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I intend to make it one," and walked away before she could answer. Miriam stayed beside the garden until the lantern light from the porch stretched across the ground and touched the little mint plant like a promise. The mint survived. By the end of Miriam's second week at Red Lantern Ranch, one small green patch had pushed through the dry bed where Ruth Mercer's garden had nearly disappeared. It was not much to look at. A few leaves, low and stubborn, trembling whenever the wind came down from the mountains. But every morning, before the hands came in for breakfast, Miriam checked it like it was a child with fever. Jonah noticed. He noticed most things, though he rarely said so. He noticed when she favored her right foot after standing too long. He noticed how she counted flour sacks twice before writing the number down in Silas's storebook. He noticed that she never sat with her back to a door. And he noticed that whenever a rider came up the road, her hands stopped what they were doing until she knew who it was. He did not ask why. Not yet. For Miriam, the ranch became a place of work, and work became a kind of shelter. She rose before dawn, made coffee, baked bread, swept dust from corners that had been ignored too long, and washed curtains until the kitchen windows let in clean sunlight again. She mended shirts by lantern light and learned which men liked their coffee black, which ones took sugar when they thought no one was looking, and which horses needed soft talking before they accepted a hand near their bridles. Wesley followed her sometimes, not like a child, but like a young man hungry for the memory of a mother's kindness. He carried water to the garden, chopped kindling, and once brought her a dented tin box full of old seed packets he had found in the tack room. "Mrs. Mercer wrote on some of them," he said, holding the box like it was something holy. Miriam opened it carefully. Inside were faded envelopes marked in a neat hand. Sage, marigold, sweet peas, lavender for the porch. She touched the writing with one finger. "Does Mr. Mercer know these are here?" Wesley's smile faded. "I don't reckon so." "Then we ask before planting." He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." That evening, she carried the tin box to Jonah, where he stood near the corral watching Boone work a young bay mare. The mare tossed her head and stamped, but Boone kept steady, speaking low. Jonah turned when Miriam stopped beside him. "Found something?" he asked. "Wesley found it." She held out the tin box. Jonah looked at it but did not take it right away. His eyes fixed on Ruth's handwriting, and for a moment his face changed so sharply that Miriam wished she had brought it another way, at another hour, with some softer warning. But grief did not ask for a proper hour. It came when it came. He took the box. The wind lifted dust around his boots. "She saved seeds every year," he said quietly. "Said buying new ones was fine, but saving them meant the place remembered itself." Miriam did not speak. He opened one packet. Lavender seeds, small and dry, slid into his palm. "Do seeds keep this long?" he asked. "Some do, some do not." He closed his hand around them. "Plant them only if you are sure." Jonah looked toward the house. The porch still had no flowers. The window boxes were empty. The rocker sat unused near the steps. "I am tired of everything here looking like it died with her," he said. The words came out low, but they struck the evening hard. Miriam's chest tightened. Boone glanced over from the corral, then looked away. Jonah seemed to realize he had spoken more openly than he meant to. He shut the tin box and handed it back to her. "Plant what you can," he said. Then he walked toward the barn. Miriam watched him go and felt, for the first time, that Jonah Mercer's silence was not made of coldness. It was made of doors he had locked from the inside, because opening them once had nearly ruined him. That night the ranch ate supper in a brighter kitchen. Miriam had hung fresh curtains, patched from old flour cloth and washed until they glowed cream in the lamplight. She made chicken stew with herbs from the last dried bundles Silas had stored away, and biscuits brushed with butter. The men noticed the curtains before Jonah did. "Looks different in here," Wesley said. "Looks clean," Boone muttered, though he took his hat off before sitting, which Miriam had not seen him do before. Silas smiled into his coffee. Jonah entered last. He stopped just inside the doorway. For a second, no one moved. His eyes went to the windows, then the table, then the small jar of wildflowers Miriam had placed in the center. Yellow prairie blooms, nothing fancy, gathered near the wash line. Miriam almost reached to remove them. Then Jonah took his seat. "They are only flowers," she said, too softly for the whole table but loud enough for him. "I know what they are," he replied. His voice was not angry. The meal went on. Halfway through supper, Wesley told a story about falling into the creek while trying to fix a loose rail. Boone claimed the creek was too shallow to fall into unless a man had been born with no balance. Silas said Wesley had been born with balance but had traded it for appetite. The men laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen in a way Miriam had not heard before. Jonah did not laugh loudly, but he smiled. It was small, almost hidden, but Miriam saw it and something in her heart moved toward it before she could stop herself. If this quiet change in the ranch touches your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes the smallest kindness is the first sign that a broken home is learning how to breathe again. The peace lasted until Sunday. Miriam had gone to town with Silas for flour, lamp oil, and coffee beans. Silver Creek was smaller than Ash Hollow, but not so small that strangers went unnoticed. The main street had a general store, a post office, a church with a white steeple, a livery stable, and a dress shop with lace in the window that Miriam did not let herself look at for long. At first, no one knew her. That was a blessing. She kept her head down while Silas ordered supplies. The store smelled of tobacco, sugar, leather, and dust. A woman in a green bonnet looked at Miriam twice, then whispered something to the clerk. Miriam felt the whisper like a hand between her shoulder blades. She told herself it was nothing. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside carrying a folded newspaper under one arm. He wore a travel coat too fine for trail dust and had a narrow face with careful eyes. He paused when he saw her. Not the glance of a stranger. Recognition. Miriam's fingers went cold around the spool of thread in her hand. The man looked down at the paper he carried, then back at her. Slowly, politely, he touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said. She did not answer. Silas noticed then. His old eyes moved from Miriam to the man, then back again. "You know him?" Silas asked under his breath. "No." But her voice betrayed her. The man smiled faintly and turned to the clerk. "I am looking for someone," he said. "A woman from Ash Hollow, goes by Miriam Vale." The store seemed to empty of air. Silas stepped closer to Miriam. The clerk looked uncertain. The woman in the green bonnet leaned nearer, hungry for news. The man unfolded the newspaper and placed it on the counter. Miriam could not read all of it from where she stood, but she saw enough. A notice. Her name. False words printed in black. Wanted for questioning in connection with stolen jewelry from the Aldridge household of Ash Hollow. Aldridge. Even the name felt like a door slamming shut. Silas's face hardened. Miriam forced herself to breathe. The man turned slightly, his polite smile still in place. "Of course," he said. "I am sure decent people around here would want to know if such a woman had crossed into their county." Miriam set the thread down. Her body wanted to run. Her pride would not let her. She lifted her chin, the way her mother had taught her, and walked past him toward the door. Silas followed close. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. The town seemed to tilt around her. She reached the wagon, put one hand on the sideboard, and held on. Silas came beside her, quiet as stone. "I should leave before this reaches the ranch," she said. "No," Silas answered. "You do not understand." "I understand plenty." She looked at him. The old man's face was no longer tired. It was angry in a steady, dangerous way. "Mr. Mercer opened that gate," Silas said. "He did not open it for gossip to close it." Miriam could not answer. On the ride back, the flour sacks shifted behind them, and the mountain stood blue in the distance. Dust rose under the wagon wheels. Miriam held her hands folded in her lap so Silas would not see them tremble. But when they reached Red Lantern Ranch, Jonah was waiting at the gate. One look at his face told her he already knew something was wrong. Silas stopped the wagon. Miriam looked at Jonah, then past him at the house, the garden, the porch lantern, the place she had almost allowed herself to trust. And for the first time since arriving, she wondered if one honest roof could survive the lies chasing her up the road. Jonah did not ask what happened in town until Miriam stepped down from the wagon. That was one thing she had already learned about him. He did not throw questions like stones. He waited until a person had both feet under them, then gave them room to speak or not speak. Silas climbed down slowly, his jaw tight beneath his gray beard. He began unloading flour sacks with more force than the work required. Wesley came running from the barn, took one look at Miriam's face, and stopped smiling. Jonah stood at the gate with his hat low over his eyes. "Miriam," he said. Her name in his voice, nearly broke the careful strength she had carried all the way home. She looked toward the mountains instead of at him. "A man came into the general store," she said. "He had a newspaper notice from Ash Hollow." Jonah's eyes moved once to Sela's. Sela's nodded. "Printed lie. Said she was wanted for questioning over stolen jewelry." The words sounded worse in the open air. They did not belong beside the ranch gate, beside cattle lowing in the pasture and laundry moving on the line. Yet there they were, ugly and alive. Jonah took the flour sack from Sela's and set it down. "What man?" "I do not know his name," Miriam said. "He knew mine." "Did he speak to you?" "Not directly. He spoke about me to the store." Jonah's face changed. Not much, enough that Wesley took a step back. Silas wiped his hands on his trousers. He wanted folks to hear it. That was the point. "Describe him," Jonah said. Miriam did. The narrow face, the fine coat, the careful eyes, the way he smiled without warmth. Jonah listened, then looked toward the road as if the man might still be standing there in the dust. "Elias Voss," he said. Silas frowned. "You know him." "I know of him. He carries messages for rich men who prefer not to dirty their own gloves." Miriam felt cold despite the heat. "The Aldridges sent him," she said. "Likely." The name Aldridge settled heavily between them. It was the family she had served for 2 years in Ash Hollow. Mrs. Beatrice Aldridge, who wore pearls to breakfast and spoke of charity while cutting wages from girls with no family. Her son, Lawrence, who smiled in church and cornered servants in hallways. Her husband, who never noticed anything that did not threaten his business. Miriam had not said all of that at the gate. She had given Jonah the shape of the truth, not its full weight. Now the weight had found her anyway. "I should leave," she said. Wesley's head snapped up. Silas turned sharply. "No." Miriam looked at Jonah. "If that notice spreads, it will damage your name. Men will say you hired a thief. They will say you are hiding me." "Let them say it. You have a ranch to protect." "I am aware. You have men who depend on you." "I am aware of that too." Her voice tightened. "Then be sensible." Jonah stepped closer, slow enough not to crowd her. Being sensible is not the same as being afraid. The words stung because they were true, and because they were not. "I am afraid," she said. "I have reason to be." His face softened in a way that almost hurt to see. "Yes," he said, "you do." Silas looked away. Wesley lowered his eyes. Miriam hated the gentleness of that moment. She could stand suspicion. She could stand gossip. She could stand hunger and heat and a 30-mile road. But kindness reached places she had kept locked because locked places did not ache as much. Jonah turned to Silas. "Unload the supplies, then find Boone. I want every man at supper tonight. No one eats in the bunkhouse." Silas nodded. "And Wesley," Jonah said. "Yes, sir." "Ride to the Graves place. Ask Mrs. Helen Graves if she would call at Red Lantern tomorrow afternoon. Tell her it matters." Wesley straightened at once. "Yes, sir." Miriam looked at him. "Why Mrs. Graves?" Jonah's gaze returned to her. "Because if Ash Hollow wants to put your name in print, we answer with names this county respects." "I do not know Mrs. Graves." "You will." He turned toward the house. "Mr. Mercer," Miriam said. He stopped. "If you fight this for me, it may not end quickly." He looked back over his shoulder. "Most things worth doing do not." Then he walked away, leaving Miriam standing beside the wagon with the dust of town still on her hem, and a fear in her chest that no longer knew whether it wanted to run or stay. That evening, every hand came to supper. Miriam cooked because cooking gave her hands something to do besides shake. She made beef and potato stew, skillet bread, and boiled greens with vinegar. The kitchen grew warm from the stove, and the windows fogged at the edges. Outside, the porch lantern swung in the wind, throwing gold light across the steps. The men entered quieter than usual. Boone came last. He removed his hat and looked at Miriam as if he had a question caught behind his teeth. For once, he did not ask it. Jonah stood at the head of the table before anyone sat. "There is talk coming from Ash Hollow," he said. "Some of you heard pieces of it already. Some will hear more when you go into town, so you will hear my answer first." Miriam stood by the stove with her hands folded into her apron. Jonah looked at each man, not rushing. "Miss Vale came here asking for work. I gave it. Since then, she has done honest labor under this roof. She has fed this crew, kept this house, helped bring back a garden that none of us had the courage to touch, and treated every man here with more respect than some of you deserve before coffee." A faint ripple moved around the room. Wesley almost smiled. Even Boone looked down. Jonah continued, "A printed notice is not proof. Gossip is not law. A rich family's accusation is not the same thing as truth. Until I am shown honest evidence, Miriam Vale remains employed at Red Lantern Ranch. Any man who has a problem with that can collect his wages tonight." Silence. The kind that had weight. Miriam could feel her pulse in her throat. Boone shifted in his chair. For one breath she thought he might stand. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the table. "I got a problem," Boone said. The room tightened. Jonah looked at him. "Say it." Boone's dark eyes moved to Miriam. "I got a problem with any man in town thinking he can decide who belongs at this table." Miriam stared at him. Boone looked uncomfortable, as if the words had cost him. "That's all." Silas gave a low grunt of approval. Wesley smiled openly now. One by one, the other hands nodded. No speeches, no grand declarations, just small signs from working men who did not waste motion when meaning would do. Miriam turned toward the stove before anyone could see her eyes fill. Jonah did not look at her. He sat down. "Eat," he said. So they ate. And for that one supper, the lie from Ash Hollow did not get a chair at the table. Later, when the dishes were done and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Miriam carried a lantern out to the garden. The moon had not yet risen. The air smelled of dust and cooling earth. She knelt near the mint bed and touched the leaves with 2 fingers. They were stronger now. Not safe, not full, but rooted. She heard Jonah before she saw him. His steps came across the yard, measured and familiar. He stopped at the garden gate. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I own cattle." She glanced back at him. "And I cook for men with stomachs. We have had this conversation." This time, the smile on his face stayed a little longer. Then it faded. "I sent a writer to Denver," he said. "There is a lawyer I trust, Nathaniel Reed. He has handled land disputes for me before. He will know how to answer the Aldridges." "A lawyer costs money." "I have money." "That does not mean you should spend it on me. I decide where my money goes." She stood brushing dirt from her hands. "What if the notice is enough?" she asked. "What if people believe it because it is printed?" "Then they are fools." "There are many fools in the world, Mr. Mercer." "I know. I have met several before breakfast." She almost laughed. The sound surprised her. It surprised him too. For a moment the garden felt less dark. Then Miriam looked down. "I have not told you everything." Jonah did not move. "I told you enough to be honest," she said, "but not all of it." "Do you want to tell me now?" Want was not the right word. Need was closer. Fear was closer still. She looked at the house, at the lantern in her hand, at the window where the dead Basil had once sat, and where tomorrow she meant to place a green cutting if it lived through the night. Lawrence Aldridge did not just lie because I refused him, she said. He lied because I saw something. Jonah's eyes sharpened. What did you see? Miriam wrapped both hands around the lantern handle. Mrs. Aldridge kept household money in a locked writing desk. I handled the accounts sometimes. One evening, I found Lawrence taking banknotes from that desk and replacing them with signed receipts from ranchers and merchants his father had never paid properly. I did not understand all of it, but I knew enough to know it was wrong. The wind shifted. The lantern flame trembled. He saw me, she said. 2 nights later he came to my room. He said if I kept quiet, he would make sure I was taken care of. I told him to leave. I made noise. The next morning, Mrs. Aldridge's brooch was missing, and by sundown, everyone in Ash Hollow knew my name. Jonah's hands curled around the garden fence. Not violently, not for show, simply because anger needed somewhere to go. Miriam, he said carefully, did you keep any proof? She looked up at him. I wanted to. I thought about taking one of the receipts, but I was afraid they would search my things. So no proof. She hesitated. His gaze caught it. What? Miriam reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the silver cross on its broken chain. She opened the tiny back panel with her fingernail. Inside was folded a strip of paper no wider than a match. Jonah stared at it. I did not take a receipt, she whispered, but I copied 3 names and 3 amounts from the desk before he came back into the room. Jonah took one slow breath. The night around them seemed to draw closer. Why did you not say that before? Because men like Lawrence do not fear poor women's words, she said, but they fear paper, and if he learns I have this, he will not just want me shamed, he will want me gone. Jonah looked from the tiny paper to her face. For the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the Aldridges. Fear for her. Before either of them could speak again, a horse cried sharply from the road beyond the gate. Jonah turned. A rider had stopped outside the fence. No lantern, no greeting, just a dark shape against the starlit road. Then something white flew over the gate and landed in the dust. A folded note. Jonah strode to it before Miriam could move. He picked it up and opened it near the lantern. His face hardened. What does it say? Miriam asked. He looked toward the empty road, where the rider had already vanished. Then he handed her the note. The message was written in a neat, cruel hand. Give back what you stole, or the next visit will not be paper. Miriam's fingers closed around the note. And in the dark garden, beside the stubborn mint that had just begun to live again, the past finally reached Red Lantern Ranch. The note lay on the kitchen table until dawn. No one touched it after Jonah read it a second time. No one needed to. The words seemed to darken the whole room by themselves. Give back what you stole, or the next visit will not be paper. Miriam sat with her hands folded in her lap, the silver cross hidden again beneath the collar of her dress. Inside that tiny cross was the scrap of paper with 3 names and 3 amounts, small enough to hide, heavy enough to bring the past riding straight to Red Lantern Ranch. Jonah stood near the stove, one arm braced on the mantel above it, staring at the note. Silas had been called from his room and now sat at the end of the table with his suspenders loose and his gray hair wild from sleep. Boone stood by the back door, as if daring the night to try again. Wesley hovered near the pantry until Silas told him to sit before he wore a hole in the floor. No one had gone back to bed. Outside, the ranch was quiet in the last dark hour before morning. A horse blew softly in the barn. The porch lantern swung in the wind, casting long gold bars across the kitchen window. Every sound felt too clear. At last, Silas leaned forward and tapped the note with one finger. "This ain't just gossip anymore." "No," Jonah said. Boone's jaw worked. "Let me ride into town and ask some questions." "You will ask nothing tonight," Jonah replied. "I can find who threw it. You can find who wants you angry enough to make a mistake." Boone did not like that. His shoulders rose, then settled. He looked toward Miriam. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but whoever sent that note ought to be dragged into daylight." "I agree," Miriam said quietly, "but not by becoming like him." Boone stared at her, then looked down. The words had surprised her as much as him, perhaps because part of her did want someone dragged into daylight. Not hurt, not ruined, just seen. She wanted Lawrence Aldridge to stand where everyone could look at him without his mother's money, without his fine coat, without his practiced smile. She wanted the lie peeled from her name like a dirty bandage. But wanting justice was not the same as wanting revenge. Her mother had taught her that too. Jonah took the note from the table and folded it once. "At first light, Boone rides to town with Silas," he said. "Not to accuse, to listen. Find out if Elias Voss is still there. Find out who he spoke to, where he slept, and whether any stranger bought feed or asked directions toward this ranch." Boone nodded. "Wesley," Jonah said. The boy straightened. "Yes, sir." "You ride to the Graves place again. Tell Mrs. Graves I ask her to come sooner than afternoon if she can." "Yes, sir." "And Miriam." Her name seemed to pass through the room more softly than the rest. She looked at him. "You write down everything you remember about those 3 names on the paper, not just names and amounts, where the receipts came from, how often you saw them, whether Lawrence handled his father's desk before, anything." Her fingers tightened around each other. "You think the names may matter?" "I think men with money hate witnesses more than thieves," Jonah said. "So yes, they matter." The sky was pale by the time the ranch moved into morning. Miriam cooked breakfast with the whole house watching the road. She made oatmeal, bacon, biscuits, and coffee, though she could hardly swallow her own tea. The men ate in tense silence. Even Wesley did not speak. When Boone and Silas rode out, every eye followed them until they disappeared past the cottonwoods. After breakfast, Miriam sat at the kitchen table with paper in front of her. The 3 names from the scrap were burned into her mind. Harlan Pike, $42. Benjamin Tate, $71. Eli Summers, $18. She had copied them in the Aldridge house with a shaking hand while listening for footsteps in the hall. At the time, she had not known why those 3 mattered. She only knew Lawrence Aldridge had been taking money from the locked desk and replacing it with papers signed by working men. Receipts, he had called them when he saw her looking. Business, he had said with a smile that made her skin crawl. Now she wrote everything she could remember. Harlan Pike was a cattleman with a small spread east of Ash Hollow. Benjamin Tate owned a freight wagon and hauled goods between towns. Eli Summers had supplied hay one winter after a freeze killed most of the grass. She had seen each man come to the Aldridge house at least once. She remembered Harlan Pike standing in the front hall with his hat crushed in both hands. She remembered Mr. Aldridge refusing to see him. She remembered Lawrence laughing after the door shut. Miriam wrote until her wrist ached. Jonah came in once, saw her writing, and set a cup of coffee by her elbow without a word. She did not drink coffee often, but she did then because her head had begun to feel stuffed with wool. By mid-morning, Helen Graves arrived in a black buggy, driving herself with the straight-backed force of a woman who had never waited for permission in her life. Miriam saw her through the window. Helen stepped down wearing a dark traveling dress and a hat pinned with a blue ribbon. Her silver hair was tucked neatly beneath it, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut through a lie at 20 paces. Jonah met her in the yard. They spoke briefly. Helen's gaze moved to the house, then to the road, then back to Jonah. She did not look frightened. She looked offended, as if trouble had been rude enough to arrive at her neighbor's gate without an invitation. When she entered the kitchen, she removed her gloves finger by finger. "You must be Miriam Vale," she said. Miriam stood. "Yes, ma'am." "I knew Ruth Mercer." Helen's face changed for one breath, softened by old memory, then steadied again. "Any woman who has been trusted with Ruth's garden deserves to be heard before she is judged." Miriam did not know what to say to that. "Thank you," she managed. Helen took the chair across from her without being asked. "Jonah tells me the Aldridge family has sent a printed accusation, and someone has now sent a threat." "Yes." "Then we will not waste time pretending this is only gossip." Jonah placed the folded note on the table. Helen read it once. Her mouth tightened. "I know the Aldridges," she said. Miriam's head lifted. "Not well enough to dine with them, well enough to avoid doing so. Beatrice Aldridge has always believed money is a substitute for virtue. It is not." Helen set the note down. "And Lawrence has had complaints whispered about him for years." Miriam felt the words strike something deep inside her. Complaints whispered about him for years. So she had not been the first. She had only been the one he chose to destroy loudly. Helen looked at her carefully. "You are very pale, child." "I am fine." "No, you are upright. There is a difference." Jonah's eyes flicked toward Miriam, and she looked away from both of them. Helen leaned back. "Now tell me what proof you have." Miriam opened the cross again. Helen watched without interrupting as the tiny folded strip came out. When Miriam placed it on the table, it looked almost foolish. A little scrap of paper, 3 names, 3 amounts, not enough perhaps to save a woman's name. Helen did not treat it as foolish. She bent closer, read each line, then looked at Jonah. "Harlan Pike," she said. "Any relation to your Silas?" "Brother," Jonah answered. Miriam turned to him. "Silas did not say." "He may not know yet." Helen tapped the paper. "Benjamin Tate passed through my land twice that spring hauling wire. Good man. Talks too much when he is nervous. Eli Summers died last winter, but his widow keeps the hay ledger herself. If Aldridge cheated him, she will know." Hope came so suddenly that Miriam distrusted it. "You think they would speak?" "Not for you," Helen said plainly. "They do not know you, not for Jonah either, perhaps. Men sometimes fear powerful families more than they hate being cheated." She paused, then lifted her chin. "But they might speak for me." Jonah nodded slowly. Miriam looked between them. "Why would you do that?" Helen's eyes returned to her. "Because I have lived long enough to know a lie told against one woman becomes a warning to all the others. And because Ruth Mercer once stood beside me when half this county thought a widow could not run cattle without a man telling her which end of the rope to hold." Her voice stayed calm, but the meaning filled the room. Miriam's eyes burned. Helen reached across the table and covered the scrap with her gloved hand. "Also," she said, "because Lawrence Aldridge has needed humbling for a long time." For the first time since the note came, Wesley smiled from the doorway. Helen turned sharply. "Young man, were you listening?" Wesley froze. "No, ma'am." "Good, then you heard nothing worth repeating." "Yes, ma'am." "Except this," she added. "A decent person does not run from the truth just because rich folks arrive wearing clean cuffs." Wesley nodded solemnly. Jonah almost smiled. By noon the plan was set. Helen would send letters quietly to Harlan Pike, Benjamin Tate, and Mrs. Summers. Jonah would wait for Nathaniel Reed, the Denver lawyer, who was expected within 2 days if the telegram reached him in time. Boone and Silas would return from town with news of Elias Voss. Until then, no one from Red Lantern Ranch would ride alone, and Miriam would not go into town. Miriam listened and nodded where she was supposed to, but a heaviness grew in her chest. Not because they were helping, because they were risking themselves. After Helen left, Jonah found Miriam in Ruth's garden. She had gone there to breathe but had ended up pulling weeds with too much force, breaking roots instead of loosening them. Her hands were dirty. Her eyes were dry. The mint shook in the wind at her knees. Jonah stopped outside the gate. "You have that look," he said. "What look?" "The one that says you are planning to leave before anyone can tell you not to." Miriam closed her eyes. So he had noticed that too. When she opened them, he was still there, patient as the mountains. "I bring danger to people who show me kindness," she said. "No, dangerous people are following the trail of their own lies. That is not the same thing. It feels the same when the danger reaches the door." Jonah came into the garden then, not too close, close enough that his shadow touched the dry soil beside her. "You think leaving protects us?" "It might. It protects the Aldridges," he said. "It protects whoever threw that note. It protects every man who counts on decent people stepping aside because trouble is inconvenient." Miriam looked up sharply. His voice was controlled, but there was fire under it. "I watched Ruth die because a mountain storm kept the doctor away," he said. "That was a thing I could not fight. No court, no fence, no rifle, no prayer could turn that storm around. I had to stand there and learn what helplessness felt like." Miriam went still. Jonah's eyes were on the garden, but he was no longer seeing it. "For 3 years after, I told myself if I could not save what mattered most, then I would save nothing. I would just work, keep the cattle alive, keep the men paid, keep breathing because quitting was not in my nature." His jaw tightened. "Then you came to my gate asking for one honest roof." Miriam's breath caught. He looked at her then. "I heard that prayer, Miriam. I have thought about it every day since." The garden seemed to fall silent around them. Her hands trembled in the dirt. "I was embarrassed that you heard it," she whispered. "I was ashamed that it sounded like something this house had forgotten how to be." The words sank deep. Behind them, the porch lantern moved in the wind though daylight still held the yard. A loose hinge creaked softly. In the barn, a horse stamped once. Jonah took one more step. "You are not leaving because wicked men are loud," he said. "Not unless you want to leave for yourself. And if you do, I will put money in your hand and a horse under you and send 2 men with you as far as you ask." She stared at him. "But if you are leaving only because you think your presence makes this ranch less safe," he continued, "then hear me clear. This ranch was not safe before you came. It was only quiet." Miriam pressed a hand to her mouth. For a moment she could not speak at all. Then Boone's horse came pounding up the road. Jonah turned at once. Boone rode through the gate hard, dust flying from his horse's legs. Sela's was behind him, grim-faced and pale beneath his hat. Jonah strode toward them. Miriam followed, wiping her hands on her apron. Boone swung down before his horse had fully stopped. "Voss left town before sunrise," he said, "but he didn't leave alone." Jonah's face hardened. "Who went with him?" Sela's answered, voice low. "Lawrence Aldridge." Miriam felt the world narrow. Boone looked at her, then at Jonah. "And there is more. They were asking directions to the old canyon road, the one that cuts behind your north pasture." Jonah's eyes moved toward the mountains. Miriam knew before anyone said it. The old canyon road did not lead to town. It led behind Red Lantern Ranch. And whatever Lawrence Aldridge had planned, he was no longer hiding behind paper. The old canyon road had been closed for years. Not by a gate, not by law, but by sense. It cut behind the north pasture through a narrow stretch of red rock, where the trail bent close to a drop and loose shale slid under a horse's hooves without warning. In dry weather, it was dangerous. In rain, it was foolish. At night, only a desperate man or a reckless one would use it. Lawrence Aldridge was not desperate. That made him more dangerous. Jonah stood in the yard with the whole ranch gathering around him. Boone's horse breathed hard, sweat darkening its neck. Silas leaned one hand against the saddle, still catching his breath. Wesley came from the barn with his face pale, and two other hands followed close behind. Miriam stood near the porch steps with dirt still on her apron, and the tiny silver cross cold beneath her dress. "Why would he take that road?" Boone asked. "To reach the back of the ranch unseen," Jonah said. Wesley swallowed. "You think he means to come here?" "I think he wants Miriam frightened enough to run," Jonah answered, "or foolish enough to meet him alone." Miriam felt every eye try not to look at her. She stepped forward. "Then he does not know me as well as he thinks." Jonah turned toward her. There was something in his gaze that almost stopped her, not command, not doubt, but the weight of a man measuring danger around a person he had begun to care about too much. "He knows enough," Jonah said. "Men like Lawrence do not need the whole truth. They only need the part they can twist." Boone spat into the dust. "Let me take 2 men and ride the canyon." "No," Jonah said. The answer came too fast for Boone's liking. "Why not?" "Because if Aldridge wants us scattered, we will not scatter." Boone's jaw tightened. "So we sit here and let him choose the hour." "No, we choose the ground." Jonah looked toward the barn. "Wesley, saddle the bay and the gray. Boone, take Roy and check the ridge above the north pasture, but stay in sight of the fence line. No chasing shadows into that canyon. If you see tracks, mark them and come back." Boone looked ready to argue, then thought better of it. "Silas, send a rider to Mrs. Graves. Tell her Aldridge is in the county and using the canyon road. Ask her to send word to Judge Holloway." Silas nodded. "I'll send Dan." Jonah looked at Miriam last. "You stay close to the house." She lifted her chin. "I am not a parcel to be placed on a shelf." "No," he said quietly. "You are the reason a dishonest man is taking a dangerous road behind my land. That does not make me helpless." "I did not say helpless." "But you meant hidden." A silence fell over the yard. The hands pretended not to listen, poorly. Jonah stepped closer and lowered his voice, but not enough to make the words secret. "I meant alive." Miriam's anger faltered. His face was controlled as always, but his eyes were not. In them she saw the canyon road, the note, the newspaper notice, the memory of Ruth dying in a storm no man could stop. Jonah Mercer did not fear easily. That was clear. But helplessness had once carved a place inside him, and now any threat to Miriam touched that old wound. She understood it too well to resent it fully. "I will stay near the house," she said, "but I will not be shut in a room." Jonah nodded once. "Fair." That word, small as it was, steadied her. The ranch changed after that. Not loudly. Red Lantern Ranch was not a place for panic. The men checked rifles but kept them out of sight. Horses were saddled and tied ready in the shade. Boone and Roy rode north, their silhouettes rising against the pale slope before they disappeared near the fence line. Dan took the road toward the Graves place at a hard trot. Silas moved between barn and house like an old soldier, remembering a war he had not spoken of. Miriam returned to the kitchen because men still needed feeding, danger or not. She made bread with hands that would not stay steady. She cut potatoes, salted meat, and set a pot to boil. The ordinary work helped. Flour did not care about rumors. Fire did not ask a person to explain her past. A knife in hand, used properly, turned one thing into another. That made sense to her. Jonah came in just before noon. Dust marked his shirt. He had been walking the yard, studying sight lines from the back fence, the barn, the ridge beyond the garden. She knew because she had watched him from the kitchen window when she thought he would not notice. Of course he had. "You have not eaten," he said. "Neither have you." "I am not standing over a stove." "No, you are wearing a path into the yard." He looked toward the window. "You noticed." "I notice most things." His eyes returned to her, and for a brief second, despite everything, something warm moved between them. A shared truth, a mirror. Then the warmth faded under the weight of what waited outside. Miriam set a plate on the table. "Eat." Jonah sat. He took 2 bites before saying, "Nathaniel Reed should arrive tomorrow if the stage keeps schedule. And if Lawrence acts today, then he acts before the lawyer comes, which may be what he wants." She leaned against the counter. "He always did prefer rooms without witnesses." Jonah's hand stopped over the plate. Miriam had not meant to say it that plainly. The words slipped out because the kitchen was quiet, and because Jonah had become a dangerous kind of safe, the sort of safe that made truth rise before she could bury it. She folded her arms around herself. "In Ash Hollow," she said, "Lawrence was never the loudest man. That was why people trusted him. He spoke softly. He smiled at old women. He held doors. He gave coins to children outside church. Then in hallways, in closed rooms, in spaces where no one could see clearly, he became someone else." Jonah listened without moving. "He liked making people doubt themselves," she continued. "If I stepped away when he stood too near, he would ask why I was being unkind. If I refused a favor, he would wonder aloud whether I thought myself above my place. If I looked frightened, he would say he was only trying to help." Her fingers gripped the fabric of her sleeves. "The worst part is not that he lied about me after. The worst part is that, before I left, he made me afraid I would sound foolish if I told the truth." Jonah's face had gone still, in the way winter water goes still before it freezes. "You do not sound foolish," he said. Miriam looked at him. The words were simple, no softness wrapped around them, no pity, that made them stronger. "You sound like a woman who learned the shape of a snake before others saw the grass move," he said. She let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh and almost a sob. "That may be the strangest comfort I have ever received." It was meant better than it sounded. "I know." For a moment the danger outside could not enter the kitchen. There was only Jonah sitting at the table, Miriam standing by the stove, and a truth spoken without being punished. Then a gunshot cracked from the north ridge. Not close enough to strike the house, close enough to stop every breath inside it. Jonah stood so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. Miriam reached the window. A second shot echoed over the pasture, then a third, farther away. Horses cried from the barn. Wesley shouted somewhere in the yard. Jonah was already moving. "Stay inside," he said. She followed him to the door. "No." He turned sharply. Her heart pounded, but she did not step back. "If someone is hurt, I can help. You know I can." He looked at her hands, the same hands that had worked bread and soil. The same hands, perhaps, he would one day know had steadied broken bones and fevered brows in places where doctors came too late. "You have treated wounds before," he said. "Yes." "How much?" "My mother was a midwife and a healer in Nebraska. I learned beside her. Cuts, fevers, broken fingers, snakebite once. I cannot do miracles, but I can keep a man alive long enough for better help." Another thing she had not told him. Another room opened inside her past. Jonah absorbed it without reproach. "Then get clean cloth and the medical box," he said. "But you stay behind the porch until I know what we are facing." This time she obeyed because it was not about hiding. It was about sense. The yard filled with motion. Wesley brought 2 horses around. Silas emerged from the barn with the old medical box already in hand, as if he too had guessed. The men not on the ridge gathered near the fence. Minutes stretched. Then Boone appeared over the rise with Roy beside him, and between them on a horse was a third man slumped forward. Not one of theirs. Miriam shaded her eyes. The injured man wore a fine travel coat torn at the shoulder. His hat was gone. Blood marked his sleeve, not pouring but enough. Elias Voss. Jonah's mouth tightened. Boone rode into the yard, angry enough to make the air around him seem hotter. Found him near the North Wash, Boone said. Horse threw him after the shots. Bullet scraped his arm, not deep. Who fired? Jonah asked. Don't know, he says Aldridge did. Voss lifted his head weakly. His careful face was pale and streaked with dust. Without the store counter, the newspaper, and the polite smile, he looked smaller. He tried to kill me, Voss said. Jonah stared at him. Miriam stepped forward before fear could stop her. Bring him to the washroom. Voss saw her then. His eyes widened. You, he said. Yes, she answered, me. For a second, old shame tried to rise. The memory of the general store, the printed notice, the way he had spoken about her like she was not in the room. Then she looked at the blood on his sleeve. Sit him down, she said. The men obeyed. In the washroom, Miriam cut away fabric, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it tight. Voss hissed through his teeth but did not complain. Jonah stood by the door the whole time. Boone stayed outside like a guard dog pretending to be a man. When the bandage was tied, Miriam stepped back. You will live, she said. Voss gave a dry, broken laugh. That is more mercy than I earned from you. No, Miriam said. It is not mercy, it is work. He looked at her then, really looked, perhaps for the first time. Jonah's voice came from the doorway. Tell us what happened. Voss swallowed. I did not know he would go this far, he said. Lawrence, Miriam asked. He flinched at the name. Yes, he hired me to carry the notice. Said you were a thief who had taken papers from his family. Said you were dangerous if cornered. He looked at his bandaged arm. But on the canyon road he started talking wild. Said if you gave back the scrap, all would be clean. Said if you did not, maybe a fall from a ridge would end the whole matter. Miriam felt the room tilt. Jonah took one slow step inside. Why would he shoot you? He asked. Voss's throat worked. Because I told him I would not help with that. Boone cursed outside the door. Voss looked at Miriam. His voice thinned. I have done dirty errands for rich men. I will not pretend otherwise, but I am not that kind of man. Miriam held his gaze. Not that kind. How many men said that only after discovering where their line stood? Still, he was here, bleeding in Jonah's washroom, and Lawrence Aldridge was somewhere beyond the ridge, armed with fear and pride. What does he want now? She asked. Voss closed his eyes for a moment. The paper in your cross, he whispered. Miriam went cold. Jonah looked at her. She touched the silver cross beneath her collar. Voss opened his eyes again. He knows. Someone in Ash Hollow remembered you wearing it. He guessed where you hid it. The room fell silent. Then from somewhere outside, Wesley shouted. Rider coming. Jonah turned and strode out. Miriam followed as far as the porch. A lone horseman had stopped beyond the front gate. He sat straight in the saddle, dressed in a pale coat that looked almost white in the burning afternoon sun. Even at that distance, Miriam knew him. Lawrence Aldridge removed his hat politely. His voice carried across the yard, smooth and clear. Miriam, he called, I only came to ask for what belongs to my family. Jonah stepped down from the porch. The ranch hand spread behind him. Miriam's fingers closed around the silver cross. And Lawrence smiled at her like the whole world was still his to command. No one moved at first. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath beneath the hard afternoon sun. Dust drifted across the yard in thin brown ribbons. A horse stamped near the barn, then went still, as if even the animals understood that something dangerous had ridden to the gate wearing polished boots and a gentleman's smile. Lawrence Aldridge sat beyond the fence with his hat in one hand, and his pale coat clean enough to look insulting after the canyon dust. "Miriam," he called again, warm as Sunday bells. "There is no need for all this display. I only want to speak with you." Jonah stood at the bottom of the porch steps, broad shoulders squared, his face calm in a way that made Boone shift his weight behind him. Silas stood near the corner of the house with the medical box still in hand. Wesley had gone pale but did not run. The other hand spread quietly along the fence, not threatening, not shouting, just making it clear that Lawrence would not be walking through that gate because he wished it. Miriam stood on the porch with one hand closed around the cross beneath her dress. A few weeks earlier, she might have hidden behind the door. A few weeks earlier, the sound of Lawrence's voice might have made her doubt her own memory. But Red Lantern Ranch had changed something in her. Not made her fearless. Fear was still there. It sat cold beneath her ribs, but fear no longer had the reins. Jonah looked back at her once. He did not tell her to go inside. That small choice steadied her more than any command could have. Miriam stepped down from the porch. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he did not stop her. She walked until she stood beside him, close enough that her sleeve nearly touched his. Lawrence's smile sharpened when he saw it. "There you are," Lawrence said. "I was beginning to think Mr. Mercer had decided to speak for you." "I speak for myself," Miriam answered. Her voice carried. It surprised even her. Lawrence bowed his head slightly, as if humoring a child. "Of course." Jonah's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Lawrence turned his gaze over the yard, measuring the men, the house, the barn, the open windows. Miriam could almost see his mind working. He had expected shame to do most of his labor. He had expected whispers, fear, maybe a lonely woman willing to step aside where he could shape the conversation. He had not expected a full ranch standing between him and the lie. "I came peacefully," Lawrence said, "yet I find myself greeted like a criminal." Boone gave a low sound under his breath. Jonah spoke before Boone could. "You came through my North Canyon road after a man was shot." Lawrence's brows lifted. "Shot?" "The innocence was perfect, too perfect." "Elias Voss is in my washroom," Jonah said, bandaged and talking. For the first time, Lawrence's smile faltered. Only a blink. Miriam saw it. So did Jonah. "So he found his way here," Lawrence said. "I am glad. He panicked on the canyon road and rode off before I could help him. I feared he might injure himself." "You always did have a gentle explanation ready," Miriam said. Lawrence's eyes returned to her, the warmth in them cooled. "And you always did mistake concern for control." The old words, the old trap. He placed it softly, inviting her to defend herself, to sound emotional while he sounded calm. Miriam breathed in. The air smelled of dust, horses, and the faint mint growing behind the house. "I used to believe that," she said. "That was your gift, Lawrence. You could make a person apologize for the bruise your hand left on their spirit." Silence moved through the yard. Not because she had shouted, because she had not. Lawrence's mouth tightened. Jonah looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw no pity, only respect. Lawrence straightened in the saddle. "This is becoming dramatic. I came for stolen property, a scrap of paper taken from my father's private desk." Miriam lifted her chin. "Then you admit there is a paper." He went still. It was small, the mistake. So small most people might have missed it, but Jonah did not miss it. Silas did not. Helen Graves, arriving in her black buggy at the bend of the road, did not miss it either. Her buggy rolled up behind Lawrence and stopped with a sharp pull of the reins. Lawrence turned, irritation flashing before he hit it. Helen Graves stepped down like a judge entering court. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, "what a surprise to find you at my neighbor's gate." Lawrence recovered quickly. "Mrs. Graves, I had not realized you were involved." Men rarely realize how many women are involved until the truth stops being convenient. Boone coughed once, hiding a grin. Helen walked to the fence and stood on the ranch side after Silas opened the gate just enough to let her through, then shut it again before Lawrence could even think of moving. She took her place near Miriam, not in front of her, beside her. It was a powerful thing, that beside. Lawrence saw it too. His gaze flicked from Helen to Jonah, then to Miriam. "You have been busy," he said. "No," Miriam answered. "I have been honest. That takes less work than you would think." Helen's eyes gleamed briefly. Lawrence leaned forward in the saddle, his voice lowered, still smooth but edged now. "Miriam, I understand you are frightened. I understand you feel wronged. But you have gotten yourself tangled with people who do not know the whole story. Come back to Ash Hollow. Return what you took. My mother is prepared to be merciful." The word merciful almost made Miriam laugh. "Almost. Your mother accused me of stealing her brooch because you needed me discredited. You were seen near her room. I cleaned her room every day. You had access to the desk. So did you." His face stilled again. Miriam stepped one pace closer to the gate. Jonah moved with her, not ahead, not behind, just near. "You took money from your father's locked desk," she said. "You replaced it with receipts from working people your family had not paid right. Harlan Pike, Benjamin Tate, Eli Summers." The names rang across the yard. Lawrence's expression did not break fully, but the color shifted under his skin. Helen spoke then, clear and cold. "Harlan Pike is prepared to say he never received the $42 marked as paid. Benjamin Tate is on his way to my ranch with his wagon ledger, and Mrs. Summers has already sent word that her husband's account was never settled." Miriam turned to Helen, stunned. Helen did not look at her. Her eyes remained on Lawrence. "You should choose your next words carefully," Helen said. "There are more witnesses coming than you planned for." For the first time, Lawrence looked trapped. Not beaten, not yet, but trapped enough that the gentleman's mask began to crack at the edges. "You cannot prove intent," he said. Jonah's voice came low, "but we can prove a lie." Lawrence looked at him with open dislike now. "This is not your affair, Mercer. You made it my affair when you threw a threat over my gate." "I did no such thing." "Then you will not mind Elias Voss saying who ordered it." Lawrence's grip tightened on his reins. The horse felt it and tossed its head. Miriam saw the change in him before the others did, the cold patience leaving, the calculation turning quick and sharp. Lawrence did not like losing control in front of people. He especially did not like losing it in front of a woman he had once expected to frighten into silence. His eyes locked on Miriam's throat. "The cross." "Give me the paper," he said. No warmth now, no concern. There he was. The man behind the polite voice. Miriam's hand closed over the cross. "No. You do not understand what you are doing. I understand better than I ever have. If that paper leaves this county, you will regret it." Jonah took one step forward. Lawrence's gaze snapped to him. "Careful, Mr. Mercer," Lawrence said softly. "You have land, cattle, men who depend on your good standing. A man can lose a great deal by protecting the wrong woman." The yard went very still. Jonah's face did not change, but Miriam felt something move through him like thunder too far off to hear. "The wrong woman," Jonah repeated. Lawrence smiled again, smaller now. "You know what I mean." "No," Jonah said, "I do not think I do." Miriam looked at him. Jonah removed his hat slowly. "I think the wrong woman is the one your mother chose to ruin, because she trusted your name more than the truth. I think the wrong woman is every servant girl who ever learned to step away from you in a hallway. I think the wrong woman is every widow and ranch wife your family cheated, because you thought their ledgers would not matter." His voice stayed calm, but every word landed hard. "And I think the woman standing beside me is the first one with enough courage to bring paper against you." Lawrence's face flushed. Helen smiled, not kindly. Miriam could not speak. Something inside her had gone still, not from fear this time, but from the shock of being defended without being owned, believed without being questioned, stood beside without being pulled behind. Then Wesley shouted from the barn, "Riders on the road!" Everyone turned. 3 riders came over the rise from town. One was Judge Samuel Holloway, his black coat dusty from travel. Beside him rode Nathaniel Reed, Jonah's Denver lawyer, thin and sharp-eyed beneath a gray hat. The third was Benjamin Tate, the freight man Miriam remembered from the Aldrich Hall, broad-faced and nervous, clutching a leather ledger to his chest like it might fly away. Lawrence stared at them. Helen folded her hands. "Well, that is timely." Jonah glanced at her. "You sent for Holloway." "Of course." "And Tate." "I sent for everyone." By the time the riders reached the gate, Lawrence had rearranged his face, but not enough. Judge Holloway looked from Lawrence to Jonah, then to Miriam and Helen. "Seems I arrived in the middle of something," the judge said. "You arrived just in time," Helen replied. Nathaniel Reed dismounted and gave Jonah a brief nod, then turned immediately to Miriam. "Miss Vale." "Miriam Vale," she said, then corrected herself because she was tired of half-truths. "Miriam Hart. Vale was my mother's name. I used it after leaving Ash Hollow." Reed's eyes sharpened, but he did not press. "Very well, Miss Hart. Mrs. Graves says you hold a copied record relevant to the Aldridge accounts." Miriam's hand trembled once as she opened the cross. The tiny paper came free. So small, so fragile, so nearly lost. She placed it in Reed's gloved palm. Lawrence moved his horse half a step forward. Boone's hand went to the gate latch. Jonah's head turned slightly and Boone stopped. No violence, not unless forced. Reed unfolded the paper, read it, then turned to Benjamin Tate. "Mr. Tate, does your ledger show an unpaid $71 from Aldrich Holdings?" Benjamin swallowed. He opened the ledger with clumsy fingers. "Yes, sir," he said. "It does. I was told it was paid. It never was." Judge Holloway's face darkened. Helen looked toward Lawrence. Still only a misunderstanding. Lawrence said nothing. Then from the washroom window behind them came Elias Voss's voice, weak but clear. "He ordered the notice. He ordered the threat. And he told me if Miss Hart would not surrender the paper, she might have an accident on the canyon road." Every face turned toward the house. Voss stood inside the window, one hand braced on the frame, pale and sweating but upright. Lawrence's mask broke. "You fool," he snapped. There it was. Not polished, not gentle, not concerned. Only rage. Judge Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Aldridge, I believe you had better dismount." Lawrence looked at the judge, then at Jonah, then at Miriam. For one breath, Miriam thought he might run. Instead, his face smoothed again, but the effort came too late. Everyone had seen what lived beneath it. "This is not over," he said. "No," Miriam answered, her voice steady, "but it is no longer hidden." That was when the wind rose behind the house and caught the porch lantern, making it swing hard on its hook. The metal struck wood with a sharp ring. Jonah looked at the lantern, then at Miriam, and she knew he was remembering the prayer from her first night. One honest roof. For the first time, it felt less like a plea, and more like a place being built. Lawrence Aldridge did not dismount at once. For one long moment, he stayed in the saddle with every eye on him, his face caught between the man he wanted the world to see and the man who had finally been dragged into daylight. The pale coat, the polished boots, the careful voice, all of it suddenly seemed thinner than paper. Judge Holloway waited beside the gate. Nathaniel Reed folded Miriam's little scrap and placed it inside his coat pocket, as calmly as a man locking a strongbox. Benjamin Tate stood near his horse with his ledger clutched in both hands, looking frightened but relieved, like a truth he had carried too long had finally found other shoulders. Helen Graves did not move. She watched Lawrence with the cold patience of a woman who had seen pride destroy men before. Jonah stood beside Miriam, not in front of her. That mattered more than he could know. At last, Lawrence swung down from his horse. His boots struck the dust softly, but the sound felt final. Judge Holloway opened the gate. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, "you will come with me to town. We will speak properly there." Lawrence's eyes went to Miriam. "This little performance will not save you," he said. Jonah took one step, but Miriam touched his sleeve. Just the lightest touch. He stopped. Miriam looked at Lawrence and felt the old fear rise again, out of habit more than power. It came with memories of hallways, locked desks, lowered voices, the way he had once made her feel foolish for trusting her own eyes. But now there were witnesses. Now there was paper. Now there was a whole ranch behind her, and her own name returning to her like something she had thought dead. "My name is Miriam Hart," she said. "You do not get to decide what saves me." Lawrence's mouth tightened. Helen Graves smiled faintly. Judge Holloway took Lawrence by the arm, not roughly, but with enough firmness to make the point. Lawrence did not resist. Men like him rarely fought when the audience was too large and the outcome uncertain. They preferred closed rooms and quiet threats. Daylight did not favor them. As the judge led him toward the road, Elias Voss leaned harder against the washroom window. Sweat stood on his face, but his voice carried again. "I will give my statement," he said, "all of it." Lawrence turned on him with such open hatred that even Benjamin Tate stepped back. Jonah saw it. So did Judge Holloway. "So will I," Benjamin said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. The freight man swallowed hard, then raised his chin a little. "I should have spoken when the money first went missing from my account. I didn't. Aldridge business kept my wagons running and I have children to feed, but I will speak now." Helen nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less once the man found his spine. Miriam looked at him, and instead of anger she felt a weary kind of understanding. Fear made people late to the truth. It did not always make them enemies. "Thank you," she said. Benjamin looked down. "I'm sorry it took so long." Judge Holloway rode out with Lawrence beside him. Nathaniel Reed followed with Benjamin Tate. Helen stayed behind, because Helen Graves never left a battlefield until she had seen who was still standing. The yard remained quiet after the riders disappeared. No cheering came, no laughter, no easy victory. Red Lantern Ranch knew better than that. A truth spoken was not the same as a wound healed. A wicked man being taken to town did not erase the nights Miriam had spent afraid or the years Jonah had spent alone inside a house full of silence. But something had shifted. The lie was no longer chasing her unseen. It had a face now, a name, witnesses, a judge, a lawyer. And for the first time since Ash Hollow, Miriam did not feel like she was running. Boone was the first to speak. "Well," he said, pushing his hat back, "I reckon supper's going to be late." Wesley stared at him. "That's what you're thinking about." Boone shrugged. "A man can care about justice and still be hungry." Silas gave a dry laugh that broke the tension, just enough for the men to breathe again. Miriam looked at the cookhouse. The noon meal had been forgotten entirely. The bread dough had likely risen too far, the potatoes sat half-cut, and the stew had never made it to the stove. "I should see to the food," she said. Jonah turned to her. "You do not have to cook today." The men looked alarmed. Even Helen's brows lifted. Miriam almost smiled. "I think your hands disagree." Wesley nodded before remembering himself. "Only respectfully, ma'am." For the first time that day, Miriam laughed. Not much, not freely, but enough that Jonah's face changed when he heard it. Helen saw that too. Of course she did. If you believe one act of courage can change more than one life, stay with this story a little longer. The truth has finally stepped into the light, but the heart often takes longer to follow. The rest of the afternoon moved strangely, as if everyone on the ranch had been given back a few hours they did not know how to use. Boone and Roy checked the North Ridge again and found tracks where Lawrence and Voss had come through the canyon road. Silas wrote down every detail at Nathaniel Reed's request before the lawyer left for town. Wesley watered the garden with unusual care, as if the mint itself had fought Lawrence and deserved extra kindness. Helen sat with Miriam in the kitchen while she cooked. That was the first surprise. The second was that Helen took a knife and began peeling potatoes without asking. "You do not have to help," Miriam said. "I know." Helen peeled slowly, neatly, her gloved hands replaced by hands that looked more used to work than her fine dress suggested. After a while she said, "You stood well out there." Miriam kept her eyes on the breadboard. "I was frightened." Standing well does not mean standing without fear. Miriam said nothing. Helen placed a peeled potato into the bowl. Ruth used to say Jonah was the strongest man she knew and the loneliest one alive, even when she was sitting beside him. Miriam's hand stilled. Helen continued, not looking up. He loved her deeply. No one who knew them doubted that, but even before she died, Jonah carried sorrow like he had been born owing it something. Ruth could make him laugh. She could make him rest. She could make him forgive the world for an hour. A pause. When she died, the hour ended. Miriam pressed her palm flat against the table. "I am not trying to take her place." Helen looked up sharply. "Good heavens, child, no one worth loving has a place another person can take." The word struck Miriam with unexpected force. Helen's face softened. "Love is not a chair at a table," she said. "It is more like a lantern. One flame does not shame another by being lit." Miriam looked toward the kitchen window. Outside, Jonah stood near the fence speaking with Boone. His hat was pushed back, his sleeves rolled, the sun catching the dust on his shoulders. He looked tired. He looked alive. "I do not know what I feel," Miriam admitted. Helen gave a small sound that might have been amusement. "At your age, that is allowed. At my age, too, though people pretend otherwise." Miriam almost smiled. Helen leaned closer. "But I will tell you what I saw." Miriam looked at her. "I saw a man who has lived 3 years like a locked door choose not to stand in front of you today because he trusted you to speak. And I saw you touch his sleeve because you knew exactly when his anger might cost him more than he meant to pay." Helen returned to the potato in her hand. "That is not nothing." Miriam's throat tightened. Outside, the afternoon wind stirred the curtain she had washed. The house smelled of bread and stew. The basil cutting in the window, green and small, leaned toward the light. "I am afraid kindness will become another debt," Miriam whispered. Helen's knife paused. Then, do not accept kindness from people who keep ledgers in their hearts. Miriam looked at her. And Jonah. Helen's mouth curved. That man can track cattle across stone after rain, but he would not know how to collect a debt of affection if you placed it in his hand with instructions. Miriam laughed softly despite herself. By supper, the ranch felt different again. The men gathered tired and hungry, but there was a looseness in them that had not been there before. Boone told the table that if Lawrence Aldridge ever came through the canyon road again, he hoped the shale would do the county a favor and scare the sense into him. Silas said the shale had better judgment than most men. Wesley asked if courage felt different after a person had used it. Helen, who had stayed for the meal, told him courage mostly felt like needing to sit down afterward. Miriam served stew and bread. When she brought the last plate, Jonah looked up at her. "Sit," he said. The word was quiet, not a command. She hesitated. The room noticed. Boone cleared his throat and pushed out the chair beside him with his boot. "Cook ought to eat before the rest of us empty the pot." Wesley nodded hard. "Yes, ma'am." Silas poured coffee into a cup and set it at the empty place. Miriam looked at Jonah. His gaze stayed steady, giving her the choice. Slowly she sat. It was only a chair, only a meal, only a place at the table. But when the men began eating around her, when no one stared too long, when Helen passed her the butter as if this had always been natural, Miriam felt something inside her ache with a tenderness she could not name. Belonging did not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it came as a chair pulled back by a rough man who had once doubted you. After supper, Helen left for the Graves ranch with Silas riding beside her part of the way. The hands drifted to the bunkhouse. Wesley lingered long enough to ask if the garden needed anything else before morning. Miriam told him no, and he seemed almost disappointed. Night settled warm over Red Lantern Ranch. Miriam stepped onto the porch with a shawl around her shoulders. The brass lantern beside the door burned low. Beyond the fence, the road lay empty. For once, the emptiness did not frighten her. Jonah came out a few minutes later. He stood at the other end of the porch, leaving space between them. He had done that from the beginning. Left room. Let silence sit without making it heavy. "Nathaniel thinks Holloway will hold Lawrence at least until statements are taken," he said. "That sounds like good news." "It is. But not the end." "No." She nodded. For a while they listened to the night. Crickets in the grass, a horse moving in the barn, the soft knock of the porch lantern against its hook. Then Jonah said, "You told him your name." Miriam looked down at her hands. "Yes. Miriam Hart. It feels strange hearing it." "Does it feel wrong?" She thought about that. "No," she said. "It feels like opening a trunk that has been shut for years and finding something inside still whole." Jonah leaned one shoulder against the porch post. "It suits you." Her heart moved in a quiet, dangerous way. "Thank you." He looked out at the yard. "I should have asked sooner. I might not have answered." "I know." The honesty made her smile faintly. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl. Jonah reached as if to catch it before it slipped, then stopped himself. The small restraint felt more intimate than touch. Miriam noticed. So did he. She drew the shawl closer. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For bringing half-truths into your house." Jonah shook his head. "You brought what you could carry." The words nearly undid her. She looked away toward the garden because her eyes had filled, and she did not want to make the moment heavier than it already was. Jonah's voice softened. "When I heard you pray that first night, I thought you were asking God for shelter from the world." "I was. I know, but I also think this house was asking for something through you." Miriam turned back. His face was shadowed by the lantern, but his eyes held the light. "What was it asking for?" she whispered. Jonah looked toward the kitchen window, the garden, the rocker no one had used for 3 years. "To be opened again," he said. Miriam did not know what answer to give. So she gave none. The quiet between them changed. It was not empty. It was full of things neither had reached for yet. Then a wagon bell sounded faintly from the road. Both of them turned. A single wagon came slowly toward the ranch, its lantern swinging. Not fast, not threatening, but unexpected. Jonah stepped off the porch. Miriam followed to the top step. The wagon stopped at the gate and an old man climbed down with difficulty. He leaned heavily on a cane. His hat was battered, his coat worn thin, and his face, under the lantern glow, looked like a ghost Miriam had tried for years to forget. Her breath left her. Jonah looked back at her. "Miriam." She gripped the porch rail. The old man at the gate lifted his face. "Miriam Hart," he called, voice cracked with age and regret. "I am your father, and I have come to tell the truth before I die." The porch seemed to tilt beneath her hand. Because the past had not finished arriving. It had only changed horses. Miriam did not move. Her father stood beyond the gate like a man who had crossed 1,000 miles and arrived too late to be welcomed. The lantern on his wagon swung in the night wind, throwing weak light over his bent shoulders, his worn coat, and the cane trembling beneath his hand. For years, Miriam had imagined this moment in every possible way. Sometimes she imagined herself slamming a door in his face. Sometimes she imagined asking him why. Sometimes she imagined he would look exactly as he had the last time she saw him, proud and stern, with a Bible in one hand and a debt ledger in the other, telling her obedience was a daughter's highest duty while trading her future to a man twice her age. But the man at the gate did not look powerful now. He looked old. That made it worse. Jonah stood in the yard between Miriam and the gate. He did not open it. He did not speak for her. He only looked back at her, waiting. That too was a kindness. "Miriam," the old man called again. "Please, I know I do not deserve the sound of your voice, but I have come with papers." "Papers?" The word cut through the shock. Miriam stepped down from the porch. Her feet felt distant from her body as if someone else were walking her across the yard. Dust pressed soft under her shoes. The ranch behind her had gone silent. Somewhere near the barn, Boone had appeared. Silas stood in the kitchen doorway. Wesley peered from the bunkhouse shadows, hat clutched to his chest. Every person stayed back. Jonah waited until Miriam reached his side. "Do you want him turned away?" he asked quietly. She looked at the old man at the gate. Nathan Hart, her father, the man who had once decided her life was worth less than the money he owed Daniel Whitaker. The man who had told her she should be grateful someone respectable wanted her. The man who had not followed when she ran. "No," she said, though the word hurt. "Open it." Jonah opened the gate. Nathan Hart came through slowly, leaning on his cane. Up close, Miriam saw how much time had taken from him. His beard had gone white. His cheeks had hollowed. His right hand shook even when he tried to hide it. But his eyes were the same pale gray she remembered from childhood. They looked at her now, with something she had never seen in them before. "Shame." "Miriam," he said softly. "Do not say my name like you have a right to it." He flinched. Good, she thought, then felt no satisfaction from it. Jonah stood beside her, close enough that she knew he would step in if needed, far enough that the choice remained hers. Nathan bowed his head. "You are right." The wind moved through the yard. The brass lantern on the porch creaked against its hook. Nathan reached into his coat, and pulled out a packet wrapped in oilcloth. "I heard in Ash Hollow that Lawrence Aldridge was looking for you," he said. "Then I heard your name in connection with a ranch near Silver Creek. I knew if Lawrence had found you, Daniel Whitaker might not be far behind." Miriam went still. Jonah's eyes sharpened. Daniel Whitaker. Her father looked at Jonah, then back at Miriam. "The man I gave you to," he said, and his voice broke on the last words. Miriam's hands curled at her sides. "You did not give me," she said. "You sold the right to command me and called it protection." Nathan closed his eyes. "Yes." The yard seemed to hold that word. "Yes." Not an excuse, not a sermon, not a father telling his daughter she misunderstood, just yes. Miriam had wanted that admission for so long that hearing it felt almost unreal. Nathan opened his eyes again and held out the oilcloth packet. "I cannot undo it. I cannot give you back the years, but I can give you this." She did not take it. Jonah did. He unwrapped the oilcloth carefully and revealed a folded contract, several letters, and a small leather ledger stained at the corners. Nathan's voice was thin but clear. "Daniel Whitaker never had lawful claim to her. I wrote the agreement myself, and I wrote it badly because I was desperate and drunk on debt. It was not a marriage contract. It was not filed. It was not witnessed properly. It was a private debt paper disguised as an engagement arrangement. He used it because I was too ashamed to challenge him." Miriam could hardly breathe. Nathan looked directly at her. "You were never his wife, never bound to him, never owned by him in law or before God. I let him make you believe otherwise because I was a coward." The words landed so deep they seemed to change the shape of the night. Jonah's hand tightened around the papers. "Miriam," he said quietly, "Nathaniel Reed needs to see these." "I know," she whispered. Nathan nodded. "There is more. The ledger shows payments I made to Whitaker after you left. He told me he would keep searching unless I paid him what he claimed was still owed. I paid for 2 years. Then I stopped when sickness took the farm and most of my strength with it." Miriam stared at him. "He was hunting me for money." Nathan swallowed. "At first, yes. Later, I think he hunted you because you proved you could leave." The answer was so close to what she had always feared that it should have shattered her. Instead, a strange calm entered her. The monster had a shape now. The chain had ink. The fear had signatures and dates and weak men behind it. She had not been foolish. She had not imagined the trap, but the trap had never been as lawful as they made her believe. Her father looked smaller with every truth he told. "I should have come sooner," Nathan said. "Yes," Miriam answered. "I should have stood between you and him." "Yes." "I should have believed a daughter was not a debt to be paid." Her throat tightened. "Yes." He bowed his head. "I am sorry." Miriam waited for the words to heal something. They did not. But they opened a window in a room she had been trapped in for years. That was not nothing. Jonah folded the papers back into the oilcloth. "You can stay in the bunkhouse tonight, Mr. Hart. In the morning, we ride to town and put these before Judge Holloway and Nathaniel Reed." Nathan looked startled by the courtesy. "I do not want to trouble your home." "You already brought trouble," Jonah said evenly. "Tonight you can bring evidence." Boone gave a low, approving grunt from the shadows. Miriam looked at Jonah. His face was firm but not cruel. She understood then that justice did not have to spit. It could simply stand upright and refuse to look away. Nathan was given a place in the bunkhouse. Silas brought him water without warmth but without insult. Wesley took care of his tired horse. Boone watched the old man as if measuring whether regret could be trusted overnight. Miriam returned to the porch. She did not cry. That surprised her. Jonah came to stand beside her after a while. The yard had settled again, though not into peace. It was the hush after thunder when a person knew more weather might still come. "You were quiet," Jonah said. "I thought I would have more to say." "You said enough." She looked toward the bunkhouse. "I hated him for years." "That is understandable." "I still do a little." "That is too." She turned to him. "Can a person forgive and still not want back what was broken?" Jonah's eyes moved across her face with care. "Yes," he said. "I think sometimes forgiveness is not opening the door again. Sometimes it is only setting down the chair you were holding against it." The image went through her gently. She looked at the porch lantern. "Did you do that with Ruth?" He was silent for a long time. "No," he said at last. "I kept the chair there after there was no door left." Miriam's heart ached. Jonah looked out toward the garden. "I thought if I let this house become warm again, it meant I had loved her less. I know that makes no sense." "It makes grief's kind of sense." He gave a faint, sad smile. "That is about the worst kind." "Yes." The night softened around them. The moon had risen over the ridge now, pale and round, turning the pasture grass silver. The little mint bed behind the house was hidden in shadow, but Miriam knew it was there, rooted, living. Jonah's voice lowered. "When Lawrence came today, I wanted to stand in front of you." "I know. But you did not need that." "No. I am learning." She looked at him then. "So am I." The space between them felt full again, the way it had the night before the wagon bell. Full of things unnamed, not because they were weak, but because they mattered too much to be rushed. Jonah looked at her hand, resting on the porch rail. He did not take it. Miriam, after a moment, moved her fingers until they lightly touched his. Not clasping, not claiming. Just touching. Jonah went very still. Then his fingers turned, slowly, carefully, and held hers with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Neither spoke. For a few heartbeats, the world was only moonlight, weathered wood, and two people who had both learned to survive alone, discovering that silence could be shared. Morning came with hard news. Judge Holloway had sent a rider before sunrise. Lawrence Aldridge was being held in town, but Daniel Whitaker had arrived in Silver Creek during the night and was already speaking with men at the hotel. He was claiming Miriam was unstable, confused, and under Jonah Mercer's influence. He was asking the judge to place her in his custody until the Ash Hollow matter could be resolved. Miriam read the note twice at the kitchen table. Her father sat across from her, gray-faced. Jonah stood behind her chair. Silas, Boone, and Helen Graves, who had arrived at first light as if summoned by instinct alone, filled the room with grim silence. Nathaniel Reed's message ended with one sentence. "Bring Miss Hart, her father, and all documents to town by noon." Miriam set the note down. For the first time, no one told her to stay behind. Helen adjusted her gloves. "Well then." Boone reached for his hat. "Reckon we ride." Jonah looked at Miriam. "Your choice." Miriam stood. She touched the silver cross at her throat, then the papers her father had brought, then the edge of the table where she had been given a place. "My whole life," she said quietly, "men have spoken about me in rooms where I was not allowed to answer." She lifted her chin. "Not today." And when Red Lantern Ranch rode toward Silver Creek, Miriam Hart rode with them at the center, no longer running from the road behind her, but heading straight toward the truth waiting ahead. Silver Creek had never looked so quiet. The town sat under the noon sun with its white church steeple, dusty boardwalks, and wagons tied along the main street, but as Red Lantern Ranch rode in, every face seemed to turn. Men paused outside the livery. Women slowed near the dress shop window. A boy carrying a sack of feed stopped in the road until his father pulled him aside. Miriam Hart rode between Jonah Mercer and Helen Graves. Behind them came Boone, Sailors, Wesley, Nathan Hart, and two more hands from the ranch. They had not come to frighten the town. They had come as witnesses. Still, the sight of them made people step back and whisper. Miriam heard pieces as they passed. "That is her. From Ash Hollow. Mercer brought half his ranch. Mrs. Graves is with them." That last whisper mattered. Miriam saw it in the way people stood a little straighter after saying Helen's name. Respect was a strange kind of armor. It did not stop pain, but it made cowards think twice before throwing stones. Jonah looked ahead, not at the windows. His face was calm, but Miriam knew him well enough now to see the tightness in his jaw. Helen sat straight in her saddle as if she had ridden into harder towns than this and found them lacking. Boone looked ready to stare down any person who breathed wrong. Wesley rode pale but proud, one hand steady on the reins. Nathan Hart looked as if each step of his horse carried him closer to judgment. Perhaps it did. Judge Holloway had agreed to hear the matter in the town hall instead of his small office, because too many people had already been touched by the lies. Nathaniel Reed had insisted that public talk required public correction. Helen had agreed so sharply that no one argued. The town hall smelled of pine boards, dust, and warm bodies. By the time Miriam entered, half the benches were full. Lawrence Aldridge sat at the front with his coat brushed clean, but his face had lost its easy confidence. Beside him stood a local deputy. Elias Voss sat nearby, pale from his wound but upright. Benjamin Tate clutched his ledger. Harlan Pike had arrived at Helen's request, a thin man with tired eyes and hands cracked from work. Mrs. Summers sat in black near the aisle, her late husband's hay ledger in her lap. And near the front, dressed in a dark suit with silver at his temples and a face arranged into careful concern, stood Daniel Whitaker. Miriam knew him before anyone said his name. He had aged but not softened. His beard was neatly trimmed. His boots shone. His eyes moved over her the way they used to, not like a man seeing a person, but like a man finding property misplaced. "Miriam," Daniel said gently. The room quieted. Jonah took one step forward. Miriam touched his sleeve once, just as she had at the gate. He stopped. She stepped ahead of him. "My name is Miriam Hart," she said. Daniel gave a sad smile, crafted for the room. "Of course, if that is what you need to call yourself today." A murmur passed through the benches. Miriam felt the old pull of his voice, the careful sorrow in it, the invitation for others to pity him and doubt her. For a breath, the town hall became his house again, his parlor, his rules, his soft corrections, his steady way of making her sound unreasonable before she finished a sentence. Then she felt the silver cross at her throat. She felt Jonah standing behind her, not holding her up but ready if she reached. She felt Helen's presence beside the aisle like a lit match. Judge Holloway struck his gavel once. "That is enough. This meeting is not for performance. Mr. Reed, begin." Nathaniel Reed rose from the front bench. He was a small, lean man, but when he spoke, the room bent toward him. "We are here because several claims have been made against Miss Miriam Hart, known recently as Miriam Vale. First, that she stole from the Aldridge household in Ash Hollow. Second, that she unlawfully fled a binding arrangement with Mr. Daniel Whitaker. Third, that Mr. Jonah Mercer has hidden or influenced her improperly." He turned a page. "Today, we will place evidence against rumor." Lawrence looked toward Daniel. Daniel did not look back. Reed called Elias Voss first. Voss stood carefully, one hand near his bandaged arm. He did not meet Lawrence's eyes. "I was hired by Lawrence Aldridge to carry a printed notice into Silver Creek," Voss said. "He told me Miss Hart had stolen jewelry and papers from his family. Later, on the canyon road behind Red Lantern Ranch, he told me the paper she carried could damage his father's accounts. He asked me to help recover it. When I refused further involvement, he fired near me. My horse threw me. I made my way to the ranch. Lawrence sprang up. That is a lie. Judge Holloway's eyes hardened. Sit down, Mr. Aldridge. Lawrence sat, but rage burned through his polished face. Reed then called Benjamin Tate, Harlan Pike, and Mrs. Summers. One by one, they opened ledgers, showed unpaid amounts, and matched them to the names Miriam had copied. The numbers lined up, not perfectly enough to look planned, honestly enough to look real. Mrs. Summers spoke last. My husband died believing he had failed to collect what he earned, she said, voice quiet but steady. We went without coal that winter because Aldridge Holdings marked our hay bill paid when it was not. If Miss Hart saw that wrong and wrote it down, then she did more for my husband's name than men with offices ever did. Miriam's eyes filled, but she did not look down. Lawrence's face had gone pale. Reed placed the tiny copied paper from Miriam's cross beside the ledgers. It looked almost too small to have carried so much fear. Yet there it was, the first thread pulled from a whole cloth of lies. Then Reed turned to Nathan Hart. Miriam's father stood with difficulty. His cane struck the floor once, twice, then steadied. Reed asked him to state his name. Nathan Hart, he said, father of Miriam Hart. His voice shook, but he did not hide from the room. Reed held up the oilcloth packet. Are these documents yours? Yes. What do they show? Nathan swallowed. His eyes found Miriam, then dropped. They show that I owed Daniel Whittaker money. They show that I made a private arrangement giving him authority to court my daughter and take her into his household until the debt was settled. His voice broke. They also show there was no lawful marriage, no proper contract, no filed paper, no right for him to claim her as wife or ward. A low stir moved through the room. Daniel Whittaker stepped forward. Judge Holloway, this is a family matter. Mr. Hart was unwell when he wrote those papers. Miriam was young and confused. I took responsibility for her when no one else would. Miriam felt cold anger rise, clear and clean. No, she said. Every head turned. Reed looked at her. Miss Hart, would you like to speak? Miriam's hands trembled, but she stood. Jonah shifted behind her, then stopped himself. She walked to the front. For years, men had spoken in rooms while she stood in kitchens, hallways, corners, and shadows. For years, the truth had lived in her throat like a bird with tied wings. Now the whole town waited. My father was wrong, she said. He has admitted it. Daniel Whittaker was wrong. Lawrence Aldridge was wrong. But I was not confused. I was not unstable. I was not a thief. I was a woman without money who learned that some men call control protection when they want the world to bless it. No one moved. She looked at Lawrence. I saw you take money from your father's desk. I saw you hide unpaid accounts. When you knew I had seen too much, you tried to make me ashamed enough to disappear. Then she looked at Daniel. And you searched for me not because you loved me, not because you feared for me, but because I left without asking your permission. That was the wound you could not bear. Daniel's face tightened, but his voice stayed soft. Miriam, you are emotional. For the first time, she smiled. Yes, she said, I am, and I am still telling the truth. A murmur moved through the benches, but this time it did not sound like gossip. It sounded like people waking. Judge Holloway struck the gavel once. That will be enough from Mr. Whittaker, unless he has lawful documents to present. Daniel looked toward Nathan Hart's papers, then at the judge, and for the first time Miriam saw the truth settle over him. He had no chain left. Reed spoke again. He explained that the Ash Hollow accusation now appeared connected to financial misconduct inside the Aldridge household. He stated that the printed notice against Miriam was unsupported by evidence. He placed the copied paper, the ledgers, Voss's statement, and Nathan Hart's documents into the record. He asked Judge Holloway to refuse any custody request from Daniel Whitaker, reject enforcement of the Ash Hollow notice inside Silver Creek, and forward the evidence to the territorial authorities. Judge Holloway listened. Then he stood. "This town has entertained enough rumor," he said. "Miss Miriam Hart is not to be detained, surrendered, harassed, or spoken of as a fugitive under my authority. Mr. Whitaker has shown no lawful claim. Mr. Aldridge will remain under legal hold pending further inquiry into threats, false notice, and account fraud. The documents will be sent to Denver. Let the record show that this court finds no evidence of theft by Miss Hart." The gavel fell. For a moment, Miriam heard nothing. No evidence of theft. No lawful claim. Miriam Hart. Her name had been spoken in public without shame attached to it. Then the room moved. People whispered, stood, turned. Mrs. Summers came to Miriam first and took her hand. Benjamin Tate tipped his hat with wet eyes. Harlan Pike nodded once, too overcome for words. Elias Voss looked at her from across the room and bowed his head, not asking forgiveness, only offering the shape of regret. Nathan Hart approached last. "Miriam," he said. She faced him. "I will not ask you to forgive me today," he said. "That would be another thing taken too soon." Her throat tightened. "I do not know what I can give you," she said. He nodded, tears bright in his old eyes. "Then give nothing, keep what is yours." For the first time in her life, her father did not ask her to be smaller. That was the only apology she could accept that day. Outside, the sun had begun to lower over Silver Creek. People watched as Miriam stepped onto the boardwalk. Some looked ashamed, some looked curious, some looked away. Helen Graves came beside her. "You did well," Helen said. "I almost shook apart. Most strong women do. We simply do it standing." Miriam laughed through the tears she had refused inside. Boone cleared his throat behind them. "I reckon anybody in town still hungry for gossip can come ask me about it." Silas snorted. "That threat alone should reform half the county." Wesley grinned. Jonah said nothing. He waited until the others moved toward the horses, then came to stand beside Miriam near the hitching post. "You have your name back," he said. She looked down the street, past the church, past the general store where the notice had first been shown, past the road that no longer felt like the only answer. "Yes," she said, "but I do not think a name is something a person gets back all at once." No, I think you live in it until it fits again." Jonah nodded slowly. "That sounds true." She turned to him. "And you?" "Me? What do you get back?" His eyes moved toward the west, where the mountains held the last light. "I do not know yet." Miriam looked at his hand. This time he did not wait for her. He offered it openly, palm up, as if asking without words. She placed her hand in his. The street did not vanish. The town still watched. The past still existed. Ruth's memory, Miriam's scars, Jonah's grief, the lies, the roads, the fear, all of it remained part of them. But his hand was warm, and hers did not pull away. If this ending touched your heart, let me know in the comments whether you believe a broken life can still become a home. And subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where truth, love, and courage find each other on the frontier. They rode home near sunset. Red Lantern Ranch waited beneath a golden sky. The porch lantern was already lit, though daylight had not fully faded. Wesley had ridden ahead and, without telling anyone, placed fresh lavender seeds in a small wooden tray by the kitchen window. Silas pretended not to notice. Boone carried in the flour sacks. Helen stayed for supper because no one dared tell her otherwise. That night, Miriam cooked at the stove while Jonah set the table. It was such a small thing that she had to look twice. "You know plates go flat side down," she said. Jonah glanced at the crooked stack. "I own cattle." "That is becoming a poor excuse." He smiled then, not a shadow of one, not a memory of one, a real smile, quiet and tired and alive. The men came in laughing about something Boone had said. Helen corrected Wesley's posture. Silas filled the coffee pot. The kitchen glowed with lamplight, bread warmth, and the soft noise of people who expected to be there tomorrow. After supper, Miriam went to Ruth's garden. The mint had spread. Not far, not enough for anyone else to be impressed, but several new leaves had appeared along the root. She knelt and touched them gently. Jonah came to the garden fence. "Do you think the lavender will grow?" he asked. "Maybe." "Good." She looked back at him. "You like lavender." Ruth did. Miriam held still. Jonah opened the gate and came inside. "And I think," he said carefully, "there is room for what she loved and what comes next." Miriam stood. The evening wind moved between them. The porch lantern swung behind him, throwing warm light across the garden path. For once, the sound of it did not feel lonely. "I prayed for one honest roof," she said. "I remember." "You heard every word." "Yes." "I was angry about that." "I know." "I am not angry now." His eyes softened. "What are you?" he asked. Miriam looked at the house, at the garden, at the road beyond the gate, then at the man before her. "Home," she said quietly. "I think I am home." Jonah stepped closer, slowly enough that she could have stepped away. She did not. He took her hand in both of his, as if it were something strong and precious at the same time. "Then stay," he said. "Not a command. Not a rescue. A hope." Miriam smiled through tears that finally came without shame. "I will." Months later, when autumn touched the cottonwoods yellow and the first cold wind came down from the Colorado mountains, Red Lantern Ranch no longer looked like a place holding its breath. Lavender grew beneath the kitchen window. Mint filled the old bed. The rocker on the porch was used again, sometimes by Silas after supper, sometimes by Helen when she visited and claimed she was only resting her eyes while listening to every word. Wesley grew into responsibility. Boone remained gruff but saved the largest biscuits for Miriam when he thought no one saw. Lawrence Aldridge's crimes did not vanish into rumor. The records went to Denver. Accounts were opened. Debts were paid. His family name survived but not untouched, and for the first time in years, the people they had cheated had paper of their own. Daniel Whittaker left Silver Creek with no claim, no custody, and no sympathy from the court. Nathan Hart settled in a small rented room near town, not as a forgiven father, not fully, but as a man trying at last to live honestly with what he had done. And Jonah Mercer began leaving the kitchen door open in the mornings. Some days grief still sat with him. Miriam never asked it to leave. She simply set coffee beside it and let sunlight into the room. One evening, as the first snow dusted the high peaks, Jonah and Miriam stood together by the gate where she had arrived with torn shoes and an empty stomach. The iron bars were warm from the last touch of sun. The road beyond them stretched quiet and wide. Miriam looked at it without fear. Jonah looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled. "That I once thought this gate was the end of the road. And now—" She slipped her hand into his. "Now it feels like where my life began again." The porch lantern glowed behind them, steady against the darkening sky. And on Red Lantern Ranch, under one honest roof, two wounded hearts learned that love did not erase the past. It gave them a place to heal from it.